Week 3 of the fantasy football season, and his top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week the first guy. Who else would it be than Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings? So week in and week out, Jefferson, you pretty much could pencil him in for 25 to 30 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this week here with a great matchup versus a weak Los Angeles Chargers secondary coming to Minnesota in another potential shootout here. It wouldn't be surprising to me if Jefferson hits that 25-30 point mark once again. And I got him at number 2, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So last week, the Patriot team, they did a decent job of limiting Hill in terms of him exploding for a monster game, but he still had 15 fantasy points in that one, finding the end zone versus the Patriots. And this week here versus a weak Denver Bronco defense that just got torched by the Washington Commanders here, I think Tyreek Hill eats in the home opener here for this Miami Dolphin team. And I got him at 2, number 3, Stefon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. So Stefon Diggs so far the first 2 weeks of the season, him and Josh Allen seem like they're on the same page. Diggs had a good ball game in week 1, especially 10 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown. And this week here, the Washington Commander team, where their secondary don't really stop anyone, where we've seen some big games already out of some receivers, especially in that Bronco ball game. I think Diggs has a good ball game once again on the road for this Buffalo Bill team. And each and every week, he's a top 5-6 receiver. Worst case, it seems like, is Diggs. And I got him at 3, number 4, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, we know he's a great wide receiver. And each and every season, it just seems like he's improving and getting better, CeeDee Lamb. Last week versus a good Jet D, he carved them up for 11 catches, 143 yards. And this week here versus a very weak Arizona Cardinals secondary, especially with Budda Baker on injured reserve, I think CeeDee Lamb once again has a big ball game. And I got him at 4, number 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So St. Brown, I know, is banged up a little bit with the ankle injury. We saw him shaking up in last week's ball game versus the Seahawks, and that's the only thing that's held St. Brown back over the last couple seasons, where he's had to make a few plays in this ball game. I still think he's going to put up big numbers, even not at 100%, versus Atlanta Falcons secondary. And this ball game definitely has big potential shootout on it between this Detroit Lion team and the Falcons. So this week I got him at 5, number 6, Devonta Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. Adams, he was banged up a little bit as well, but it looks like he's going to play in the home opener for this Vegas Raider team versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this Steelers defense, I know, is a solid unit, no doubt about it, but Devonta Adams, in my opinion, still one of the better wide receivers in all pro football. And this week here, I think he's going to make some plays in this one. Last season, he was very good at home for this Vegas Raider team. And right now, he just gets peppered with targets week in and week out, and he knows how to get open and make plays. So I got him at 6, number 7, Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. So we know Keenan Allen's top 10 potential wide receiver year in and year out, but he's another guy where injuries have just been a problem for him throughout his career. But last week, what a ball game for Allen, over 100 yards with 2 receiving touchdowns in that one. And this week here in a shootout type of ball game here at the Minnesota Vikings, I think Keenan Allen is going to have another nice ball game this week. Him and Justin Herbert, they've been on the same page since rookie season for Herbert. And this week versus secondary, that's not going to challenge Allen much here in this one. I got him at 7, number 8, Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Calvin Ridley, last week, it was a down game for him, no doubt about it, but he just missed a touchdown in the back of the end zone where he couldn't get that second foot in. And week 1, we saw him explode versus the Indianapolis Colts. So this week here, another division ball game for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. I think he bounces back with a big one versus the Houston Texans here. This week he is Calvin Ridley, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he gets anywhere from 75 to 100 yards and finds the end zone. Number 9, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So far, slow start here for A.J. Brown in the early going. Even him and Jalen Hurts have an argument on the sideline in last week's ball game. So I fully expect here A.J. Brown to get force-fed a little bit in this ball game with targets, especially Monday Night Football. Another spotlighted ball game this week here for the Philadelphia Eagles. And at the Tampa Bay Bucks, I think he can get physical and get open on the smaller secondary over there in Tampa Bay. So A.J. Brown and Philly, they're going to want to look good and make it like everything's all right after the blow-up on the sidelines last week. So I think Brown in this one, like I said, gets forced with targets on him, and he goes out there and makes some plays. And I got him at 9, number 10, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua has come out of nowhere this season. He was the 19th wide receiver selected in the NFL draft in the 5th round this past season. So right now, Nacua, 2 monster ball games to start his NFL career. Week 1, what a game it was. 10 catches, 119 yards on 15 targets. And then last week, he shattered that. 15 catches, 147 yards on 20 targets. So he's been a target machine so far in the early going here is Nakua. And I'm going to expect it to continue here in the middle of the pack Cincinnati Bengal team. Nakua is playing the Cooper Kupp role right now for this Los Angeles Ram team. Obviously, Sean McVay's getting them in good position with the scheme here for Nakua. But the only thing I worry about with Nakua, obviously, is when Cooper Kupp comes back. If his production is going to take a huge hit, which most likely it will. But right now, while he's playing great football and putting up monster fantasy points the first 2 weeks of the season here, I got him at 10 because at Cincinnati, I expect this guy to get at least 8 to 10 catches in this one. Number 11 staying in Cincinnati, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So right here, Jamar Chase, the first 2 weeks, he hasn't done anything of note. For a guy that was taken 3rd, 4th overall in most fantasy drafts, he had 8 fantasy points last week, and in week 1, only 9. So Jamar Chase said this team has to take more shots down the field, and they really haven't. And Joe Burrow, we know, is not 100%. That calf barked once again in week 2. We don't know if he's going to play in this game where Jake Browning might have to come in and be the starter on Monday Night Football. It's definitely a good matchup versus this Ram team where we saw the Niners throw all over them for the most part, where we saw Deebo Samuel have a good game last week versus them. And then obviously going back, Metcalf have a decent one as well. So this week, as long as they could get Chase the ball and find ways to make easier catches for him, I think Chase could be a bounce-back guy this week, and he also was a buy low candidate for me early in the week. Number 12, his teammate T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So T. Higgins, after the goose egg in week 1 last week, he came back with a vengeance versus the Baltimore Ravens, and he had a big ball game finding the end zone twice. So T. Higgins, he's a great wide receiver. His contract's up after the season. You know, he's going to want to get that payday. And after putting up a big ball game like that, I expect T. Higgins once again to have a good ball game week 3 versus the Rams. And I just think this Cincinnati team as a whole, even if it's Browning in their quarterback, they're going to break out in this one. Number 13, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Devonta Smith last week, a monster ball game, and he did it only on 3 catches in that ball game, going over 120 yards and finding the end zone. So we know Devonta's a big play receiver. You could get big plays on this Tampa Bay secondary. We saw it in week 1 with the Minnesota Vikings going up and down the field. And Devonta Smith, I know some games he don't do much, and then some games he has a monster 25, 30-point fantasy day. So right here at 13 is a good spot for him. Number 14, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave so far with new quarterback Derek Carr, he's looked good in the first 2 games of the season. This week, a tougher matchup, obviously, versus a pretty good secondary with Jair Alexander most likely covering Olave the majority of the ball game. But Olave seems like he could be a guy week in and week out, at least get 5-6 catches a game, 75 to 100 yards possibly. And even this week in a tougher matchup, I got him at 14. Number 15, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So far, Mike Evans off to a monster start after last season. He pretty much didn't do anything the first 10 weeks of the year until he got going later in the season. But him and Baker Mayfield on the same page. Mike Evans coming off a monster ball game in that one, going over 150 yards and finding the end zone. And this week, I know it's versus a tougher secondary of the Philadelphia Eagles, but we saw the Patriots score 20 on them, and we saw last week Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson obviously go off for big fantasy days. So right here, I think Evans, even in a tougher matchup on paper, has a good game, and I got him at 15. Number 16, Mike Williams of Los Angeles Chargers. So Mike Williams, he's a steady wide receiver and a solid number 2 wide receiver, I believe, for fantasy owners. And this week here, in a shootout potential ball game in Minnesota, I think Mike Williams has another good game this week. And him and Keenan Allen both could have good games. We saw last week both guys having good fantasy days. And this week in Minnesota in a high-scoring ball game where this secondary don't stop anyone as well. We saw Devonta Smith go off last week for them, and we saw Mike Evans go off in week 1. So right here, I think Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both go off in this one in a high-scoring ball game. 17, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers here, Thursday Night Football ball game with the New York Giants. And this Giant team, they can't stop anyone so far in the early going in the first 2 weeks of the season. Week 1, 40 points the Cowboys scored on them. And week 2 here, one of the worst offenses in the league, Arizona Cardinals put 28 on the board versus the Giants. I think this Niner team is going to roll big in this ball game. Deebo Samuel coming off a good ball game in week 2. And right here in week 3 versus a weak secondary with a few rookies back there, I got him at 17. Number 18, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So DJ Moore, week 1, it was a bad ball game for him, only 4.5 fantasy points. But last week he went over 100 yards in that one at the Tampa Bay Bucks. And right now this week at the Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to be a ball game where the Bears are trailing early and often, and they're going to have no choice but to throw the football a whole lot. Even though Justin Fields, he don't want to throw the football, it seems like. There's been obviously footage going around where there's one play, guys are wide open right up the seam, and he's just holding on to the football, keeps holding on to it, and then he takes a big sack. So Justin Fields has to make quicker decisions. And when you got a receiver like DJ Moore, who can run the routes, he can run deep and make plays, he's got to get the ball out quicker. And this week here with Chris Jones and this revamped defense over there at Kansas City, DJ Moore needs a big ball game, I believe, for them to have a chance in this one in Chicago. And I think he can make plays in this one at 18. Number 19, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So DK Metcalf, we know, is a solid wide receiver. I know the last couple seasons the touchdowns have been down for him, but this week here versus a weak secondary of the Carolina Panthers, where we saw Chris Olave have a good game, we saw Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed have a good ball game. So I think Metcalf could have a 100-yard potential ball game in this one. And right here, it's a home game in Seattle where he's usually a better home player as well, is Metcalf, than he is on the road. So I got him at 19, number 20, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So right now I know Waddle's in concussion protocol and might not play in this ball game, but I'm putting him on this list just in case he clears and passes the test. So far in the early going, Waddle, he didn't have those huge ball games. Week 1, he had 12 fantasy points. And then in week 2, before getting concussed, he had 12 fantasy points as well. So right now, this week here, it's a pretty good matchup versus the Denver Broncos that just got torched by this Washington Commander offense here. So Jalen Waddle, if he does play in this game, you know, he's a solid number 2 wide receiver for fantasy owners. So far, I know he's off to a slow start, but when you got a Tyreek Hill in this offense going off for big ball games, obviously Waddle's points are going to go down a little bit. But if he plays this week, I got him in 2021, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. So Tyler Lockett last week, a big ball game with a walk-off touchdown in overtime for the Seattle Seahawks team. So Tyler Lockett, we know year in, year out, he's going to have some great games, and some games he don't show up, but he's always a 1,000-yard receiver. And him and Geno Smith definitely have a good rapport. So this week here, what a good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers coming over to Seattle. I think Tyler Lockett once again has a solid ball game, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he finds the end zone. 22, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. So it was surprising he did play in that Monday night game with Amari Cooper after he got banged up in practice pulling a groin. But right now he played in that game. He gutted it out versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This week here, pretty good matchup versus the Tennessee Titans, at one of the worst teams over the last few seasons in terms of giving yards up to receivers. And we saw it last week. Keenan Allen over 100 yards. Mike Williams over 80 yards in that one. So I think Amari Cooper is a solid number 2 wide receiver this week for fantasy owners. Could have a good ball game. Number 23, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So Garrett Wilson last week, he did have an explosive slant that he took to the house over 60 yards. But besides that, he didn't do much. And even got nicked up at the end of that ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. But right now, this week here, big division ball game versus the Patriots, who have owned the New York Jets, winning 14 in a row. And Garrett Wilson said he's had enough of it and it's unacceptable. So right now, Wilson putting his name out there a little bit in the headlines. And they need a big ball game out of him right here is this New York Jet team. We know he's an explosive receiver. We know he can make the plays. But the problem is the offensive line isn't that good for this Jet team. And let's be honest, Zach Wilson, he's just not a consistent quarterback or that good of a quarterback that could get the ball to Wilson when this guy's been wide open. So right now, I had to lower the standards a little bit because last week, if you don't get that slant touchdown, he pretty much doesn't do anything as Garrett Wilson. So I got him in 23-24, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So you want to talk about an impressive rookie in the early part of the season here. Zay Flowers has definitely done that for this Baltimore Raven team and fantasy owners. And that's the weapon that Lamar Jackson needed. You know he's got Mark Andrews. You know he's got decent guys on the outside like Bateman and Aguilar. And Zay Flowers was that deep ball threat and guy you could use anywhere in the formation as a wide receiver. So this week with a good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts that Nico Collins just torched for a big ball game. I think Flowers has a good one this week. And even with Beckham out, we'll get more of a workload as well if Beckham don't play in this one. At 24-25, Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. So right now, he's a game-time decision going into Thursday Night Football. And if he does play in this game, I think Ayuk's going to have a good one once again here. This is a young Giant secondary with 2 rookies starting at the corner and safety position. And right now, this San Francisco team's going to have a big ball game, I believe, versus Giant team. And like I said, this Giant team's given up 68 points in the first 2 weeks of the season here. So this Niner team we know is one of the best offenses in the league. Very explosive. And if Aiyuk does play in this game, I got him at 25-26. Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So the first 2 weeks of the season, Nico Collins has gone off for good ball games. And I know most of that's come in garbage time, but once again this week at the Jacksonville Jaguars, most likely it will be garbage time once again for this Texan team, where C.J. Stroud's going to have to drop back and throw the football 40 or 50 times in this one. So right now being the number 1 wide receiver over there, and them having a decent receiving core with Robert Woods having a bounce back season so far, and the rookie Tank Dell looking good the first 2 weeks of the year. I think Nico Collins can make plays in this one as a receiver leagues or a flex option. He's definitely a solid guy at 26 this week. 27, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Pittman last season, it wasn't a good year at all for Pittman. But so far the first couple weeks of the year, he's putting up fantasy points and making plays. Here's Michael Pittman. So this week in a ball game where I think they're going to be trailing early and often at the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to have to throw a lot. And it looks like Gardner Minshew most likely will be the starting quarterback this week here for this Indianapolis Colts team, with Anthony Richardson still in concussion protocol. But no matter who the quarterback is, I still think Pittman will have a decent ball game and be a flex option type of receiver this week at 27-28. Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Addison, I wanted to put him higher on this list here, but the only thing with Addison is he just had big plays that really have made his day. Last week, a 50-plus yard touchdown, and in week 1, he had a big play as well, finding the end zone. So this week here in a game that's probably going to be a shootout with the Chargers and the Vikings, I think Addison as a number 3 receiver, low-end 2 receiver, could put up numbers once again this week. We know this Charger defense isn't that good. We know Kirk Cousins already has good chemistry and a rapport with Jordan Addison, which is a good thing. And Kirk Cousins is playing great, even though they're 0-2. He's going out there and making plays for his team. So this week I got Addison in 28-29. DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans. So I'm not big on DeAndre Hopkins this season. I think this Titan offense is going to be a struggle all season for them, and they're just forcing the football to DeAndre Hopkins in the early going. This offensive line isn't that good over there in Tennessee, where Tannehill don't have time. And to begin with, Tannehill, we know he's a turnover quarterback to start off as well. So with all those factors and a pretty tough matchup versus a good secondary, where most likely Denzel Ward will be shadowing DeAndre Hopkins in this one. I don't think he really has a good ball game, and I got him at 29. Number 30, Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions. So Josh Reynolds, so far in the early going this year, he's been that number 2 option to step up behind Amon-Ra St. Brown in this Lion offense, and he's already got 3 touchdowns this season here, is Josh Reynolds. So this week here, in another potential shootout game versus the Atlanta Falcons coming to town over there in Detroit, I think Reynolds can have another solid game, 70, 80 yards, 4 or 5 catches possibly, and maybe find the end zone. But right now was one of the hottest pickups on the wire. I got Reynolds at 30. 31, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So George Pickens, it just seems like so far in his year and change career, he'll have one great game and then one game he disappears. So last week, a big slant route that he took to the house for 70 yards really saved his fantasy day, because if he didn't do that, pretty much when only had 60, 70 yards with a few catches was George Pickens. So we know he's a big-time playmaking receiver. We know he could go out there and make the acrobatic and crazy catches here is George Pickens. But this week here for the Vegas Raiders, I don't think he's going to duplicate what he did last week. And I definitely could see it being a struggle as well, because this Raider pass rush is pretty solid as well. Obviously led by Crosby on the defensive line. So right now, last week, after coming off that big play that really made Pickens' day, I don't think he breaks a big one in this one. And I got him as a flex option in this ball game. 32, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So last week, McLaurin making a crazy grab in double coverage in the middle of the end zone there versus the Denver Broncos. And what a ball game and what a victory it was for this Commander team. But another guy, if he didn't make that big play, there's nothing over there for Terry McLaurin in terms of fantasy points. Week 1 was a pretty quiet day for him. And in week 2, like I said, that big catch touchdown acrobatic grab made his fantasy day. So this week here with a tough matchup versus the Buffalo Bills, where their defense only giving up 17 points on defense this season. The other ones was a punt return touchdown, or field goals for the most part. So right now with a tough matchup versus Buffalo, this Bill team trying to go to 2-1 on the season, and one of the better secondaries in the league here. I just find it hard for McLaurin to have a solid ball game and I got him at 32. 33, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Christian Kirk coming off a monster game, 11 catches, 110 yards last week in week 2. But it just seems like each and every week it's going to be him or Zay Jones trying to be that number 2 guy to get points this season here. 1 week it'll be Jones getting the points, and the next Christian Kirk. So this week I know it's a good matchup versus the Houston Texans, but I believe Calvin Ridley is going to get majority of the play in this one. In terms of putting up fantasy points and making big plays. So it was great to see Kirk last week put up a monster game. But this week here, I'm going to limit the expectations a little bit. And I'm going to have him as a number 3 receiver flex option at 33, 34, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Bucks. So right now, Chris Godwin, he fit more with Tom Brady in this offense as him being obviously a possession receiver and a guy taking a lot of dinks and dunks on underneath routes. But right now, it's been Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield being the 2 guys really getting it going in this offense, with Chris Godwin pretty much being a guy he's still making plays and stuff, but he's not getting a lot of catches. He's only getting 4 or 5 catches per ball game. And like I said, Mike Evans has been the big play receiver, where Baker is driving the ball more down the field than going underneath than anything. And the underneath passes, when he has done it, has been more to Rashard White out of the backfield and Cade Otton. So right now, Chris Godwin, his stock's definitely down a little bit, but he's definitely still a solid receiver in PPR leagues, where he could have those pop games at time where he could get 8 or 9 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown. But this week here versus a pretty tough Philly secondary, even though they haven't played up to snuff so far the first 2 weeks of the season. I got him at 34, 35. Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Gabe Davis last week, it was a breakout game for him. Finally, 90 yards and a touchdown in that one. Even though I know it was versus the Vegas Raiders this week, I think he could take advantage of this Washington Commanders defense. I'm not saying Davis is going to go out there and have a monster performance, but I think he got a decent ball game, 60, 70 yards in this one versus Washington Commanders defense. And we saw this Denver Bronco offense explode for some big yards, including Marvin Mims, who's their deep threat, have 2 catches, 113 yards, and a touchdown. So Gabe Davis, we know, is the deep threat for this Buffalo Bill team. But, obviously, Stephon Diggs is going to get his before anyone in this offense. And James Cook's been a vocal point of this offense as well. So this week here, even after coming off a big ball game, I got Davis at 35, and the 36 and final wide receiver I'm ranking here is Tutu Atwell of the Los Angeles Rams. So the first 2 games of the season, Tutu Atwell has been a solid fantasy contributor with over double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. And he's a gadget type of player, is Atwell. He's a speed guy down the seam as well and playing in the slot. And this week here at a Cincinnati Bengal team where I don't think their secondary is all that great, I think Atwell could have another decent ball game this week here as a number 3 receiver flex option for this Ram team, where all of a sudden it seemed like they had no offense. But now with Nakua, Tutu Atwell, and Kyron Williams, these 3 guys are making plays and putting up fantasy points. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking here for week 3 of the fantasy football season.